So I've been noticing that a lot of people have had confusions about what the other side believes when it comes to life views regarding when life begins, what's the purpose of life, um, and where does abortion fit in all this. And so I'd like to uh, go over, I guess, what each side believes and what I think is a fair, um, impartial perspective. I'm going to be talking about things that are very close to home and some things that people may not want to be brought to light, but I've always felt that when you talk about something directly, I guess just say it as it is, right? Recognize the elephant in the room. It makes it a lot easier to recognize what's going on. So let's get into it. Life views, contrasting the conservative progressive perspectives. So let's start with the meaning of life. The progressive's meaning of life is that there is no God. And I think this is very self-evident, and I'd hope that all the progressives would look at the start of this and say, yeah, this is absolutely genuine. There is no God, therefore, what do you have to life, right? You don't have to follow God's commandments. There's nothing about what happens after we die, because once you go to the grave, you're cold, you know. Nothing else happens. Nothing more is it to life. So, therefore, what you have in this life is something to be prized and treasured above all else, because this is what you got. It's one shot. So enjoy it while you can. And they would look at the carpe diem, or seize the day, as basically seize what you can get out of life, right? Which isn't really what carpe diem means. And we can go into carpe diem in just a second after we look at the conservatives' meaning of life. But so since there's nothing more to life than what's now, really all that matters is not just even the pleasure of mortality, or optimizing the maximum amount of pleasure for yourself in mortality, which of course ignores optimizing the pleasure for others as well. If you go and harm someone and trying to get your pleasure, that's obviously no good, but that kind of ignores that. But just to, I guess, get as much pleasure as you want. So it doesn't kind of consign you to, you have to get the most amount of pleasure, just as much as you want. It's all about each individual and what they want. So as long as you're consenting, it's all good. Conservatives' meaning of life: God lives. There's commandments we have to follow. He's omniscient, knows way more than we do, and so we kind of have to trust him and follow his wisdom. So of course, purpose of life is to follow his commandments. In the end, we expect to return to him by following his commandments. We get rewarded in the afterlife, and there's an eternity to come after this life. So it's not just about what happens in this life. You get a rotten deck dealt to you, rotten hand in this life. It doesn't really matter, because in the grand scheme of things, what's 100 years in the face of an infinite number of years? So, it's not all about just grab what you can grab in this moment. So coming to carpe diem, the idea of that is to seize the day, which is simply to be an agent, is to own your responsibility. And this really kind of flies in the face of what they say to pursue pleasure, because responsibility usually isn't seen as pleasure, though if you learn to value responsibility and you find pleasure in responsibility, because there's a lot of power and many other things with responsibility, then that's awesome. But the idea usually is, on the progressive side, that if you want responsibility, then it's great, right? If you find pleasure in it, that's great. If you don't find pleasure in responsibility, you shouldn't be forced into responsibility. Kind of to each person their own truth. So, but I mean, when it comes down to carpe diem and being an agent, really the true meaning is that we don't accept ourselves as victims. So we look at the day, and it's not just the day, because I mean, what's a day or an hour or a second in time period, right? Whether it's a lifetime, that could be the day, right? God, and some people talk about God's day being 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You're seizing life. You're seizing your agency. is the thing about carpe diem. And so not being a victim, not just giving up, consigning and saying, well, it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my responsibility, who am I, what am I supposed to do? If someone else should take responsibility, they should own up to it. So what if I didn't succeed? Maybe next time. But carpe diem says, hey, what lessons can I learn from my mistakes? What can I do now to make things better? What can I do now to try to regain the upper hand, regain the successes? So that's carpe diem. All right. Now, when you contrast the pleasure of mortality alone with the obedience for an eternity of happiness, there's obviously a lot more richness and fulfillment in thinking about a much bigger scheme. Whether or not it's true is irrelevant. There's plenty more, I guess, richness to an idea that life is more than just, because you might die like tomorrow, right? So maybe you only have a day left to live on this earth, and so what are you going to get right now, today? That's kind of really shallow. It steps on a lot of people's toes, right? It hurts a lot of people along the way. So there's a lot of things going against that way of thinking. So which do you subscribe to? The conservative side is that anything that hurts others to advance sin is evil, and so we'll look at that. If we're advancing sin, which is going against God's wisdom, and we end up hurting others in the process, by killing or otherwise, then we really should double think that. That's not really the meaning of life. All right, so we're on the vein of mortal pleasures now. And so progressives, when they look at the mortal pleasures, they realize that sometimes some people have to suffer and some people don't, and life isn't fair. So since life isn't fair and you want to seize what you can get, everybody kind of rushes to the power box, the happiness box, and grabs what they can get. So the world is a bunch of resources that are there for the taking. Anyone that has more took too much, and it's kind of unjust. But hey, if you can get it, you got it. So maybe we'll try to even things out in the end. But we obviously can't tell people no to grabbing their momentary pleasures, because in their words, you can't tell a teenager just to have abstinence, right? To have no sex. It's unrealistic, it's impossible, and the raging hormones and all that thing. They basically say it can't happen. You can't seize the day. You can't be an agent and decide for yourself what you're going to do. You can't decide to have responsibility, to accept whatever responsibility comes your way. All right, so inevitably, pregnancies are going to arise when you say, hey, I'm going to have my sex however much I want. Maybe you can rephrase that to say however much consenting parents will consenting couples will allow. But I'm going to get what I can get, and if pregnancies happen, and they will, because no birth control is absolutely guaranteed. Even if there's a let's say a 5% chance, then that means you do it 100 times, you will have a pregnancy. The odds are just there, okay? And so you're absolutely guaranteeing that you will have a pregnancy, but being willing to kill to secure those pleasures, to escape your responsibility, say, hey, I didn't want that for whatever reason, it doesn't even matter, then that's obviously a whole new level of taking things. So, all right, obviously if you're willing to kill, but you don't want to think of yourself as a terrible person, then your only recourse is to say, well, the prenatal child cannot be thought of as a human, which means no humanizing allowed. And so anything that humanizes the child is taboo, it's off limits, it's evil, it's morally reprehensible. You cannot allow that kind of thing, because the challenge is, everything is founded on the ability of thinking about yourself as a decent person, not a monster. Yeah, it'd be another thing if this way of thinking would be accepted readily as being monstrous, and that was okay and that was cool. But no, most people don't like to think that way. Okay, so that's obviously the greatest risk to abortion. So you can't call it a prenatal child because even though yes it's prenatal and yes it's a child, it humanizes the child to a very large degree. The other thing they can't call it is a human, even though it's absolutely human DNA from conception. We'll get to that in a moment. So conservative side is, hey, we'll adopt and help as many children as possible, help as many expectant mothers that weren't ready for whatever, they made mistakes, we get it. But when it comes down to it, if you're committed to a lifestyle of irresponsible sex, as much as you can have whenever you can get it, protected or not, you don't care. The fact remains that in addition to the damages you won't see, the pregnancies will simply be way too much. I mean, if you don't have abortion, even with abortion, conservatives can't keep up. We want to adopt and help as much as possible, but we have finite resources. You know, I mean, how many kids can two parents raise, right? When they get to their limit, let's say it's 4, right? Eventually they're going to get to the limit, and then they can't take anymore, literally for 20 years. So there are limits to how much we can do. And obviously that extends even to the tax monies, because even if you have the government pay for it, eventually the government's going to run out of money. It's going to tax you to 100%, and you know, who can live on 100% tax? And don't even get me started about government can print its own money, because everybody recognizes that's inflation, and we all pay for that by losing the value of our currency. You know, I can go into basically how that's a tax some other time. But I mean, the easiest way to think about it is if you have $100 and you used to be able to buy 10 things, but now $100 is worth less, then you can only buy 9 things, then you had a tax of 10%. Okay, so inflation taxes you by the decrease of your buying power. Alright, so we got through the mortal pleasures part. Now the beginning of life. So if you're committed to saying, hey, it's not human, well, at conception, we know that we have a full DNA strand. The DNA strand is entirely 100% human. So that kind of knocks that out of the water. So what's the fallback argument? The progressives will fall back to neurology, as if neurology is an important argument for determining the beginning of life, or humanity. You know, we used to do this with blacks and saying blacks were unintelligent. There were many things we did to dehumanize blacks in our very dark period of slavery. I think it's well accepted that blacks are fully human, that all the arguments against them are actually wrong. Blacks can be very smart and very respectable and very good people and so forth. So yeah, we're kind of doing the same thing with babies, with prenatal babies. So yeah, so what's the neurology thing all about? The idea is that the ability to think is one of the greatest defining human powers. So once we can say that the prenatal baby has significant thinking power, that there's brain activity going on, okay, maybe we don't want to touch it. You know, maybe we don't want to harm it, that is. But when it comes down to it, our intellectual powers are constantly developing. They're constantly changing. You take a 1-year-old constantly learning, not nearly as capable of more complex thought as, say, a 6-year-old or even a 14-year-old. And so we're, you know, throughout our entire lives, we're learning, we're developing our intellectual abilities, some more than others. But hey, that doesn't define our humanity. You can't say a dumb person is less human than a smart person. Where we are in our development is irrelevant to our humanity, irrelevant to our personhood. Everybody deserves to live. So this is, you know, obviously the ability to think has nothing to do with it. So then the default thing that they fall back to is pain. And I think the idea that, well, hey, if the baby can't feel any pain, then there's no harm. No pain, no harm. So, you know, but then we ask ourselves, hey, in the first place, everybody has a different pain sensitivity. Some people are highly sensitive to pain, and other people can stand a lot of pain and it doesn't bother them at all. And that's actually a neurologically developed trait. But so are people who are more sensitive to pain, are they and maybe more sensitive to pleasure, are they more alive? Are they more human, more deserving of life? And that, I think the answer is obviously no on that. And then if you can remove a person's ability to sense pain, then are they no longer human? Can you kill them without any kind of implications on morality? And I think the obvious answer is no. Pain has nothing to do with humanity or life. All right, so then the final fallback position for progressives is bodily autonomy, which is just irrelevant to the definition of life. Life exists no matter where it is if it meets the definition, which is, in the first place, human life being a full human strand of DNA. Obviously, when the two strands come together from the mother and the father, it becomes completely human. And then, what's the definition of life? Is something that's growing and has the potential to become an adult, right? So that obviously knocks all the cancer arguments out of the water, because obviously a cancer never become an adult human. So, yeah, bodily autonomy doesn't justify killing innocent people. There's no way I could justify it, whether a person is inside or outside my body, if they're dependent on my body to live, and I granted consent by having sex, right? I granted consent by saying, hey, you can hook me up. I know the implications are going to be X. It's going to have these strains in my body for this amount of time, but I can't just say, okay, the person's now dependent on my body because maybe it was a grown person hooked up to my body so my body's like helping them somehow. I can't just say, all right, now that they're dependent, I know that unhooking them is going to kill them, but I have the right to do that. No. We don't have the right. Bodily autonomy does not give us the right to kill others, especially innocent people. Never justifies killing. And in a way, bodily autonomy is a very clever way of saying I've got a right to my mortal pleasures. Okay, I can do what the heck I want with my body because I want to have the pleasure I want to have, and you ain't gonna say no to it. That's really all it is. Mortal pleasures, carnal lusts. All right. So I wish people would call it for what it really is, but hey. So the conclusion is that progressives demand irresponsible sex to secure a shallow meaning of life without God. They'll kill to secure it. They'll make the world pay, even monetarily, for that right. So that's why they want their free birth control, free abortions, and so forth. And of course, if you oppose any of that, you're attacking their lives. You're attacking their meaning to life. It's both personal and immoral what you're doing, to say they can't have their sex and no responsibility to boot. Conservatives recognize that life begins at conception. They ask that individuals accept full responsibility for their own actions. And we prefer that people know what their responsibilities are before they engage in it. But the definition of life is that the rules apply regardless of what you know or what you want to believe. So you have sex, even if you don't think you're going to have a kid, natural consequences are trump. So in the end, God's justice, God's will cannot be denied. Nature will have her due. She'll have her course. So and now we hate to see innocent prenatal babies dying by the millions by the hands of doctors that have sworn to do no harm, and it seems a little bit hypocritical of them to do that, or evil. And we hate that the law of the land ignores justice entirely by allowing abortions. So this is the perspective, as best I can see it, from both sides, the progressives and the conservatives. And I hope this provides a pretty solid understanding for where progressives are coming from, what they're founded in, and why they believe so strongly in abortion, and why there is no compromise, absolutely no compromise for abortion to any degree. Even abortion till the moment that the baby is being delivered at 9 months, called birth abortion, which is actually becoming kind of popular in the Democrat Party today, 2018. So yeah, watch that with a lot of interest, see how the people react to that, because And that's got to be really hard for people to swallow, I hope. Anyhow, and then the conservatives, obviously, we have a very rational way of viewing justice and responsibility. And it actually takes a very, I would say, a view that holds the most people's interests to heart. In the end, if the law of the land was turned around and responsibility given out so that a couple has sex and a pregnancy, they are instantly married and responsible for that baby, assuming that it was consensual, and if not, that at least the baby is protected by the law and given a chance to live in a good home. If it was rape, which is like less than 0.3% of abortions, so it's like super small. I think it's even way less than 0.1%. Anyhow, so for the vast majority, when people realize that they can't get out of their responsibilities and that having sex means being a parent, means a good chance of being a parent, and you can't wiggle out of it, then a lot more people are going to realize, hey, I just need to exercise abstinence until I'm ready to have a kid. And in an age of responsibility where people are doing that, then you're not going to have a problem. That's obviously what I did, and many other Christians. It is possible, and who knows? If you make a mistake, you use protection, and you make a mistake, but you maybe don't get a pregnancy. Maybe you just call that a missed bullet. Learn a lesson, and practice abstinence after that. And if you do get a pregnancy, then hey, you accept your responsibility and you move forward in a changed life, and you just deal with it. You can deal with it. I dealt with having a baby at a relatively early age of 21. In the middle of college. You can do it. It's no problem. You just have to be committed to responsibility and have a supporting spouse. You can get married and then no problem. So anyhow, it's not the end of the world, and it's a good way to live life. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope this helped to understand the both sides, and please like and share this, and hopefully more people can understand where progressives are really coming from and where conservatives have our stance, and why it actually makes sense and is a moral way of thinking. Alright, thanks for watching. Have a good day.